program started in just a couple of seconds here. And let me just do this. Okay, here we are, and we're off and running. So hi, and welcome to Social Capital. I'm Jim Woodell. APLU's Commission on Innovation, Competitiveness, and Economic Prosperity, or Sept for short, is excited to present this series of webinars exploring what makes innovation ecosystems work. In this series, we're looking at university partnerships with industry, government, and with communities. We're examining those partnerships from every angle and taking a look at how partners build trust and cooperate to achieve shared goals. We'd like to say thanks to all of you who joined us. We're very glad you're taking some time out of your day to join the conversation. I'm Jim Woodell, your host for Social Capital, and I am Assistant Vice President for Innovation and Technology Policy at the Association of Public and Land-Grant Universities, and I'm also the Staff Director for the Commission on Innovation. Today's program is called Civic and Social Engagement, Why Community Development Partnerships Matter. Innovation ecosystems rely not only on great talent and great innovation, but also on creating great places to work, live, and play. Place development through social, community, and cultural partnerships is a critical element. But how do universities best respond to demands for participation in regional economic development in ways that support the creation of great places to live and work? How do these strategies work to lift all boats and create prosperity for all? How do universities provide incentives to faculty to engage in civic and social engagement, or civic and social development? And what about resistance to universities playing this kind of role? What kinds of measurements and stories can best communicate the value of the role that universities play here? And how do universities and their partners work collectively to realize impact? Let's find out. Before I introduce my first guest, I'd like to invite all of you to join and participate in the conversation. All you have to do is type your questions into the chat window. There's a chat window there on your screen, and if you just share your questions with us via that window, we will try to get to as many of your questions as we can, and we very much want for you to be a part of the conversation, so please do share your questions as we go along. So I'd like to introduce my first guest. Eva Klein is president of Eva Klein and Associates, and also a board member for the University Economic Development Association, or UEDA. Eva's consulting practice is devoted to higher education strategy, which she calls Strategies for the Global Knowledge Economy. Eva's professional focus is invention of the 21st century post-Ivory Tower University and its proactive roles in serving regional, state, and national priorities. Eva has 40 years of experience in work with universities, public higher education systems and agencies, and not-for-profits. She's an acknowledged expert in higher education strategic planning, capital facilities planning, and capital financing strategies. Thank you so much for being with us today, Eva. I'd like to get started with the conversation, and we'll introduce Lloyd in just a minute, but I'd like to just get you engaged in the conversation to begin with by asking you a question, which is, from your perspective, what's one idea that will be important to help us frame the conversation today?
Thanks, Jim, and hello, everyone. I've been thinking about that question and about the title of this webinar, and if you will indulge me, I think my one idea might have two parts.
Okay.
And maybe three sentences. Looking at this from 30,000 feet up, I think I want to say that it's not just that engagement matters, but that higher education is socially, morally, and intellectually obligated to assume stewardship roles for place and for communities and region. And there are two parts to the why. It's about what we are and where we are. The what we are is, for nearly 1,000 years, society's investment in preserving, transmitting, and advancing knowledge, to which these days I think we would have to add applying knowledge. And so if we're really in a global knowledge economy, how could we not be core assets for all those knowledge management functions? The where we are is the second part, and that is because of Thomas Jefferson and other reasons, we have colleges in all kinds of places, including very small communities. And corporate leadership, which used to be important in civic action, is no longer playing that role. So the question is, who else? If the college doesn't take some real leadership role in organizing for the future of the community, who would? That's my one idea.
That's great. One idea, two parts. What we are as research universities and where we are put us in a central place for this kind of work in the knowledge and innovation economy. Great. Thanks so much, Eva. So I'd like to introduce my next guest. Dr. Lloyd Jacobs is, I know I have it somewhere here, President Emeritus at University of Toledo. Lloyd has served as president of the university from 2006 through early 2014. And during his tenure as president, Lloyd led a vigorous process of growth and transformation to establish a new vision, a new identity, and new level of educational quality and excellence at the university. Under his leadership, the university enjoyed tremendous momentum, experiencing enrollment growth to more than 22,000 students. He worked to strengthen undergraduate education, graduate and professional education and scholarship, research and service across University of Toledo's 10 professional colleges to make the university more affordable, accessible, sustainable, and student-centered, and to encourage exploration about how UT can create collaborative programs and synergies involving the arts, humanities, science, technology, and other fields. Prior to his role at the University of Toledo, Lloyd was Chief Operating Officer for the University of Michigan Health System, and one of the largest systems in the country, and Senior Associate Dean for Clinical Affairs at the University of Michigan Medical School. He also held a faculty appointment as Professor of Surgery. So Dr. Jacobs, thank you so much for being with us today. And again, I'm going to ask you the same question just before we dive into conversation. What's one key idea that can help us frame our conversation today?
Well, thanks, Jim, and good afternoon, all of you. It seems to me that a new responsibility is being thrust upon universities, or at least a major unprecedented expansion of what we have traditionally called service. When we enunciate what universities do, we speak of teaching, research, and service. Perhaps this is a major expansion of that third category, but I believe it's new, and I believe it's different. I think that we are now called upon to provide to our communities coherence, cohesion to our communities, to sort of function as the glue which holds the community together, and to not only be involved in economic development or tech transfer, but also to be a supporter of, a pillar of the flourishing of the citizenry in our community. Eva spoke of an obligation. I believe that's an obligation. I believe, as she does, that it's been with us for 800 or so years, but it has certainly been focused in the last couple of years, and I think that's what this is about, a obligation to take responsibility for the flourishing, as I say, of our citizens.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Jacobs. At this point, I was to have introduced a third guest, Jennifer from the University of Georgia. I'm sorry to say that thanks to technical difficulties, we were not able to get Jennifer to join us for today's program. But just a quick shout out to Jennifer and the University of Georgia, in particular the Office of Public Service and Outreach, for all the great work that they're doing. I wonder if somebody's microphone is on here, because we're hearing some background noise, so I'm just going to take a moment to see if I can turn that microphone off. Okay, so thanks to Jennifer for planning to be with us, and I'm sorry she's not here to join the conversation today, but we're going to go ahead and get that conversation started now. And again, I'd like to encourage all of the folks who are participating with us today to jot your questions and thoughts into the chat window so that we can bring you into the conversation as well. So let me start actually by following up on something that you said, Dr. Jacobs. You talked about, that in addition to doing things like technology transfer and really feeding into the innovation and entrepreneurship in the region, in order to achieve economic development goals, it's really important for us to be thinking about the flourishing of our communities. And as you know, the Commission on Innovation always talks about universities contributing to the economy in multiple ways through innovation and entrepreneurship development, also through talent development, and importantly also through community development, so social, cultural, and community development activities. From your perspective, why is that third circle, that community development, an important part of how we define economic development? A lot of people hear economic development and they think it's really just business, industry, technology, but that we think that community piece is an important part of what we call economic development. Why would you say it is?
Well, that's true to some extent, I think, Jim. It depends a little bit on how one defines the word economic development. My own belief is that the economy encompasses every aspect of human life. And certainly people of goodwill, such as all of us, and those people listening to this webinar, people of goodwill are interested in the holistic totality of what it means to be a human being. So I think that Eva spoke of our long-standing tradition of building humanity and positioning it for a better, fuller life. And I think that taking responsibility for the, as we say, the flourishing of the citizenry is just a part of that. It's integral to it. It's a little bit easier to focus on tech transfer or something like it, not to derogate that important function, but it's more difficult to put your hands on what it means to lift up the community, be a part of the forces that lift the community up.
Eva, you and I have been working together through your participation in the board of the University Economic Development Association to really flesh out this kind of idea that there are three circles within which universities have a role in economic development. Those three circles being talent, innovation, and place, and the place really being the piece we're talking about today, community development and similar kinds of activities. Do you want to say anything about that work that we've been doing and how it lends to what Dr. Jacobs has just said about the role of the university in place development?
Certainly, and feel free to stop me when I'm running over my turn, because this is a very, very centrally interesting topic. I'm glad you're showing this, but maybe go down one more slide to, yeah, Dr. Ern, no, the one before, Boyer.
Okay.
It is astonishing to me, actually, that we have struggled with trying to define economic development, and we have struggled to define university economic development and engagement for quite a long time. When I first was joined the board of IEDC, the International Economic Development Council, as the so-called university person, in those days, in the 90s, economic development was all about buffalo hunting. In fact, one year when I ventured the idea that we ought to have a session on workforce development in the conference, people said to me, Eva, what does workforce development have to do with economic development? So the talent piece wasn't even understood, much less the place piece. And we've come a long way in a long period of time, in a short period of time, but we're still struggling with trying to define university engagement and economic development. Even EDA is trying to make an official definition of it. So this work we've been doing, we think will, if it gets a broad dialogue from members of APLU, Sept, and UEDA, begin a very necessary discussion to come to a definition. In general, I completely agree with Dr. Jacobs that it can't be about buffalo hunting and it can't be just about business and economics. It has to be about prosperity, and prosperity is a function of talent, innovation, and place. And so I'm looking forward to seeing membership comments on this. I asked you to show this slide because I'm stunned all the time that Ernie Boyer, who was the head of the Carnegie Foundation, was on this in 1996, of the point about engaged scholarship. And it didn't take hold as much as I think it should have. And now you can back up one. 10 years later, the AASCU published this regional stewardship framework, and I think this is also a fabulous portrayal of the concept we're discussing, but it too didn't take hold because for the most part, universities saw economic development as buffalo hunting. So what do we have to do with that? It comes back to Dr. Jacobs' very broad definition.
So
I'll stop now.
what's that?
I'll stop now.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm sure that folks here who are participating with us today will look forward to seeing the model and framework that we've pulled together, which, as you and I both know, is still being reviewed by the leadership of UEDA and also of the Commission on Innovation. So we look forward to sharing it with folks soon. But I think it's interesting how you say, Eva, that these things don't take hold, even though you can look at a picture like the one we're seeing now and say, gee, that makes a lot of sense just looking at it. But given the kind of momentum of what economic development meant before these models were presented, people just kind of stick with those old frames in their mind. So I guess another question would be, you know, we can create
Jim,
our model.
May I interject
please do,
a little bit? One more sentence on this very broad definition, Eva called it, and it is that, I confess. It's reflected in the University of Toledo's mission statement, and it begins, it is the mission of the University of Toledo to improve the human condition, a very broad set of responsibilities. So I agree, I believe in a broad definition. But
the key thing there is not just do that in the form of the lone scholar sitting among a stack of books, writing with a quill pen in an isolated little monastery somewhere, but the activist intellectual who's bringing knowledge to application and to use for improving the human condition. That's the big change.
Right, and so as we make that change, how do we make sure we've created another model building on kind of this heritage of people thinking in this way about what the broad definition of economic development might mean and how universities might play a role? How do we overcome that momentum of the previous ideas, the sort of path dependence of we've always done economic development this way, so that's kind of going to be the continued mental model that we use moving forward. How do we help people understand that community development and talent development are as integral to the kinds of business development and innovation and entrepreneurship kinds of activities we're all undertaking? Either of you.
Well, I am of the mindset that the only way to influence the world around oneself in a university or out of a university, the only way is to do things. It doesn't help very much to enunciate principles. One must do things. So at this university, at least, we've made significant financial contributions to the Regional Growth Partnership, to the Port Authority, and I won't go on with other examples. But I think it's really important to do things, and then people's ideas follow their actions. Actions don't follow ideas as much as ideas follow actions.
That's a great, I like it. You have to do things. That's how you get people to see things anew. I really like that.
I have almost never not agreed with Dr. Jacobs, and I do agree about that too, but I guess I would say that in my experience, since I became a devotee of this subject in the 80s, started with research parks. You know, there was a time when some university presidents understood that economic development meant starting a tech park or an incubator, and that too is way too narrow a conception. But that's when I got interested. And I think that I have found over time that while the doing things is really the most critical, that the yakking and yakking and yakking about it also does help. I find that I run into people who are quoting things to me that I know they saw in a presentation I made at IEDC 20 years ago. 20 years ago, people crossed their eyes and said, who is she and what is she talking about? Today, people more generally understand, and after exposure and discussion and reading it several times in the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal and seeing the language emerge, that sometimes the talking and the language contributes also on top of the action.
There's no question about it. There's a reciprocity, isn't there, between action, between doing things and describing them and thinking about them in advance. There's a sort of reciprocity.
I have to defend talking and writing because I do so much of it.
And I'm a surgeon. I need to defend doing.
Let's talk about one of the challenges that we face in trying to do these kinds of things. And, you know, as natural as we all believe that these kinds of activities are to the role of our universities, what we all know is that they don't come that easily necessarily. There are all kinds of pockets of, you know, countering forces, maybe is the way I'd like to put it. But one area that we know that we need to really get behind any of this kind of activity, whether we're really talking about innovation, talent, or community and social development, is participation of our faculty. Universities don't do this because somebody in administration decides this is a good idea and then it happens. Universities do this because faculty lead our efforts to be engaged, whether it's with business and industry or the community. But thinking specifically just about sort of community engagement, community development, what are your thoughts about, you know, what have we learned about how to get faculty engaged in this kind of work? What are the incentives that we need to provide for faculty to participate in it?
Well, I will go first only because Dr. Jacobs will be a greater expert on this subject. But my observation is that 10 years ago we were at a point where maybe a third of the presidents of institutions understood this new role for higher education and zero faculty. Today we're at a point where maybe 2/3 of the presidents understand it and half the faculty. And that half is the younger half. So I tend to call this sometimes in my work faculty incentives and reward system, the final frontier. It will not work for Dr. Jacobs or any of his peers to embrace these ideas if the faculty resists. And there is right now, I think, a huge dichotomy between younger faculty who embrace active, engaged scholarship and doing things in the community, and more mature, shall we call them, older faculty that are resistant because they grew up in a different model. They were socialized in a different idea of what their careers would be like. And you can even see sometimes in engineering schools or business schools complete resistance to the idea of working with the private sector, which is kind of surprising given what those disciplines are. So I think we're partway there, and that this is, in fact, the final frontier. We're going to have to do things to change the reward system. We're going to have to make it clear. Ernie Boyer started this conversation in 1996. We need ways to evaluate engaged scholarship. When faculty go out into communities and do things, it needs to be counted. And that still is an unfinished piece of business that will hold us back until we either get the rules of the road written differently or the older people all retire, whichever comes first.
It may be a combination of both, right? The rules of the road get rewritten as people are retiring, and slowly we start to see that change.
Now I cede to the real expert because Dr. Jacobs actually has to deal with faculty on this.
Well, it's important to put this in some sort of context, Jim and Eva. It seems to me, at least, the universities of this country, particularly the research universities in the United States, are the envy of the world. They have contributed mightily to the welfare of what it is to be a human being in this country. They have underpinned the prosperity of our country in ways that are so diverse that I won't bother you trying to enumerate them. In that context, it's not surprising that people who have been so successful at contributing in a particular way and with a particular modus operandi tend to repeat that. We all tend to do those things that have been successful for us. So I don't see this as necessarily resistance, or certainly not bad intent. I see it as part of what it is to try to be a leader, to try to bring people along, and to recognize that the world is changing every day. It's, once again, characteristic of human beings to try to seek environmental stability, and doing things the way you've always done them is part of that. So what do you do? How do you do it? Well, Eva and I were there in response, Jim, to your last question. You talk incessantly. For a year after we wrote that phrase, it's the mission of the University of Toledo to improve the human condition. For one solid year, I disciplined myself never, ever to have a microphone in my hand where I didn't repeat that phrase in some context or other. And I did that. I disciplined myself to do that. And at the same time, do things that make a contribution to your community, encourage others to do the same. You know the drill. It's a matter of leadership. And I think that's being successful. Eva's sort of estimates of half of the faculty now getting it are, I think, accurate.
Well, I think that you make a great point that it's not just about doing things, it's also about saying things and saying them again and again and again. You know, I know the framework that Eva and I have been working on is something that I've been using with SciSep since I began working with the Commission, and I probably have been saying almost as long as I've been working with the Commission, every time I have an opportunity, we believe universities contribute to the economy through talent, innovation, and place. And I just keep saying it, and I'm sure people are tired of hearing me say it, but I do think it starts to pick up after a little while, and I think that's a great point, that you have to complement the doing with reminding people that this is why we're doing it and what we believe in.
Can I say a little more on this same
Please
subject
do.
before I know you, Jim, you're going to go to another question any second now. This is really important stuff because culture trumps everything. Culture trumps even money in an institution of higher education. We all know that it's an institution which, for very good reasons, changes itself with all the deliberate speed of a glacier. In this world that we live in, glacial speed is not quite good enough. But we are in a case right now where I would say legitimately faculty are confused. In general, they tend to be introverts. They tend to be people drawn more to intellectual pursuits and doing something for knowledge rather than earning a lot of money, or they'd be in some other occupation. And they therefore are people who feel it's important to get recognized and rewarded, usually through their disciplines and professional connections, but also by their university. And so right now, I think we are in a moment where it's not clear what you're going to get patted on the head for. Publications, teaching evaluations. Oh, wait, you went out there and changed something really drastic in how the forestry industry operates, and now it's saving $3 billion a year in the state and doing better. Or, oh, wait, you patented something. Or, oh, wait, you really made a massive change in the K-12 school system and how it's working. People are really just not sure what's rewarded.
Well, I think Eva's right, and to some extent, I have characterized this phenomenon as almost a bait and switch issue. Many of the people, particularly somewhat older faculty, came into this work, came into the university with the promise of a contemplative life, with the promise of a life of reading and thinking. And now we're asking them to do something quite different. It's almost a classic bait and switch. So I sympathize. At the same time, I think it's imperative that we move this ball, and I think we are.
Well, to speak to some of this, I think, I also have the good fortune in my job of working with the association's Council on Engagement and Outreach. And of course, that group of folks is very interested in how we engage faculty in all kinds of, or how faculty help us to engage the university in all kinds of activity in our regions. And I think that what the folks in the Council on Engagement and Outreach, especially those who are particularly interested in the scholarship of engagement, would say is that it's not one or the other. It's not do your scholarship or be engaged. It's do your engagement is scholarship, and there are ways that you can demonstrate that within the sort of bounds of traditional definitions of scholarship. And I'm not as well versed in this as some of those folks that I work with in the Council on Engagement and Outreach, but I think that some of them would say that this isn't a either or. It's about taking your scholarly work and bringing engagement into it, or vice versa. It's about taking the engagement that the university does and understanding it and defining it in a scholarly way. So I think it's a mixture of the traditional ways that we think about what faculty do and these new expectations. Because the question...
I agree with that, but Eva pointed out, and I think correctly, that we don't yet have good ways of measuring this new...
I want to talk some more about measurement.
The ones that we have added, you're really stuck with us now, Jim, okay, 'cause we're on a roll. The only one that I see that has actually been added in many places is patents. So if you get a patent, it might count in place of a juried journal publication, and that is by 1,000 times too narrow. It doesn't help but like 1/0.5% to this larger issue, because particularly with respect to place strategies and stewardship and being the only game in town in many communities to lead people in a civic way to figure out how to build their future, it is not going to have anything to do with patents.
Right. Well, I think
I have a great story about that if we run out of other things to say.
Well, I don't think we're going to have any problem with that, Eva. We're not going to run out of things to say. But, I want to say something about the patents, too, that I think is, when we think about these three circles, the talent, innovation, and place, I think in the place one, we talk about the word engagement and what the word engagement means. And what we know is, thanks to the Kellogg Commission and some of these other folks who worked hard to define university engagement, is that it's two-way, it's reciprocal, it's about mutual benefits between the university and the region and or its partners. And boy, when you start talking about place development and social and community and cultural development, that two-way thing is more important perhaps than in even the other categories, although it's of course important. Engagement, true engagement, two-way engagement is important across all of these. And I think you give a good example when you say that patents, what happens when we start to reach for measurement, I think, is that we reach for the things that are, obviously readily available, and those things don't tend to be things that show us how that two-way interaction happens. Before you go on, Eva, I want to get this question in from one of our participants because it's on point to a topic that we're starting to drift away from a little bit, which we've been talking about faculty and engaging faculty. And David Spisak, I hope I'm not abusing your name, David, but David is asking what tips we might have for engaging faculty that might not see the benefit of engaging in community or social or cultural development kinds of activities. What are the things that we do as leaders or others at our institution to get them to see the benefit or to get excited about doing this kind of work? Is it the things we've already talked about?
One way of mixing the sort of traditional rewards and the rewards in this new arena is to do conferences. Now, at this very moment, on the other end of this campus that I'm sitting on, there is a major gathering of people to talk about human trafficking, prostitution, forced prostitution in many cases, and deal with that scourge of humanity, which unfortunately does exist here in Toledo, Ohio. And that is being led and organized by a professor who's made it her career to study and deal with this as I call it, a scourge of humanity, and has almost developed the perfect mix of doing something for this community and the broader community of the whole country, and at the same time building a scholarly resume. So supporting that, applauding it, celebrating it. We do our very best when we celebrate that which sort of happens spontaneously. This happened, of course, without me, but when I learned of it, we tried to celebrate it and support it. So celebration is really important tip that to the questioner.
Thanks.
Celebration may be one of the only tools available to the president because he doesn't control the bare bones of the rank and tenure process. The departments do, right? So certainly awards, recognition. Again, we said these are people who want to be recognized for their accomplishments. Those are things that top leadership can do. I think we're also going to have to get at the guts of the rank and tenure processes as well. That's a slower
Well, I think that's an important point, that's slower and and not as easily accessible as just doing things like celebration. That's not to say that we shouldn't pay attention to those things that take a longer time and more effort. But a part of me wonders whether we have to do some of these kind of easy or simple, approaches to getting that kind of recognition done, and also start to motivate people. I feel like doing some of that will help us drive the other piece. So the longer term things, the harder things to move, might get pushed a little bit. The more we do some of these other things that kind of get people excited and say,
yes,
and frankly demand that things change on the longer term.
I'm a strategic planner, and so I know about taking the long view. But I have always said there are two things that are marks of a smart person. One, a smart person doesn't usually make the same mistake twice. They make a new mistake. And secondly, a smart person is able to operate in the short, medium, and long term at the same time. This is not an either or. We need to be working on what we can do today, what will take 3 to 5 years, and what might take longer in a concerted strategy.
I just want to pull in a comment.
A corollary of Eva's earlier point about this being a generational thing and younger people understanding it better. A corollary of that is that we need to pay attention to our recruitment. We need to try our very best to inspire people to recruit. Once again, it's not done in the President's office, to recruit people with a sense of social responsibility. And I think we're doing that. I think it's happening. And I think that's why we've moved from whatever percent Eva perceived some years ago to 50-50 now. That right from the beginning, we need to recruit people with a stronger sense of social responsibility than may have happened in the past.
Yeah, that's another sort of slow way. I mean, maybe it's a medium. You talked about the sort of long-term, short-term, and medium-term. Maybe that's more of a medium-term thing. I want
to add one more, Jim, to the answer to the question about what can we do.
Please do, please. Yeah.
All these highfalutin ideas aside, do not underestimate the power of money. And it is really serious. We are working now with one institution that's creating an entire separate pool of multi-millions of dollars just for projects that address multidisciplinary cross-college problems that have direct impact, that are connected to constituency needs and concerns, and the faculty are being challenged to come up with thinking about how they might regroup in different ways, because there will be money given out to these projects. So you can do a certain amount of change by creating some pools of money for which you set criteria around this community engagement, and by the way, we haven't talked about yet, multidisciplinariness of problem solving out there.
There's no question about it. The power of the institution is not totally monetized, but it's strongly monetized. And judicious use of that method is very, very important. Here at this university, for example, we have been a monetary supporter of the Regional Growth Partnership for 10 years. 9. We have contributed to a bond fund set up by the Port Authority to support minority businesses and other ways of using money in a way that promotes this agenda is very important. I think we overemphasized some of the other methods because we didn't want to overstate the use of money, but it's certainly important.
I'd like to just bring in a couple of comments that have come in from one of my colleagues from the Council on Engagement and Outreach, which I mentioned earlier. Valerie Payton from Texas Tech University has been weighing in on this conversation. I'd like to just share a couple of the comments that she's made. First of all, she says she agrees with the speakers. It's a significant amount of time for a cultural shift to happen and a reconceptualization of scholarship. So we have to just keep pushing at that is what I'm taking from what Valerie says. She also says that faculty need very clear incentives about what's important, and she mentions financial rewards, just as you did, Eva, research and graduate assistance, staff support, tenure and promotion guidelines, and incentive engaged in transdisciplinary teaching and transdisciplinary teaching, research, and service. So I think Valerie's done a great job of underscoring a number of the things that you all have said about engaging faculty. What's come up a few times here that we haven't dug into yet, and I have a feeling this will take us right to the end of our hour together, but we've talked a little bit about metrics, and I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the challenges of measuring these things, but I want to add a spin to it, which is one of the things that we now know is that, universities alone, faculty alone, our programs and initiatives alone do not create the kinds of outcomes that we want to see in the communities and that our public is expecting of us. So given that we share responsibility with others, whether it's business and industry or nonprofit organizations or the government, whomever it is, given that we share responsibility for achieving those outcomes with other groups and individuals, that I think adds a layer of complexity to the metrics question. So one layer of the question is how do we measure these things? But I think the other thing is how do we measure them knowing that the impact that we're seeking is not impact that we alone have, that it is collective. So I guess any ideas about metrics are good, but maybe also what are some thoughts that you both have about how metrics that speak to the collective nature of impact, how do we deal with that question?
Can you go to the, I'm going to start and then let Dr. Jacobs correct me, okay? Can you go to slide 11? I hope he won't mind me using this to make the point. In 2009, I did some work for University of Toledo to help define an engagement strategy, and this is sort of a shorthand model of the components of what Dr. Jacobs decided to call the relevant university. And we then said at the end of this exhaustive work, what about the metrics? And we had a couple of conversations about it. Dr. Jacobs, I don't know if you even remember this, and we decided we were way too exhausted to even tackle it. But in those conversations,
I'm feeling that way now.
But in that conversation, we arrived at the exact illumination that you just said, Jim, that the problem is so complicated, not only because there are 3 kinds of metrics, input, output, and outcome, but much more because higher education is very good at checking on its own navel. We measure the stuff that we care about institutionally and internally. Now we're talking about if University of Toledo's Health Sciences Center is going to be in the business of steward of healthcare and wellness in its community and region, it's not the only player. There are schools, there are other hospitals, there are private practice doctors, there's any number of other players. So now you need some common metrics. Dr. Jacobs, remember when we talked about why not hold the Dean of Medicine responsible for the birth weight of babies in the region? Well, yes, but he's not the only guy doing stuff that would affect that outcome. So this business of shared metrics for shared priorities and strategies is hugely complicated. And if I called faculty incentives, the last frontier. This is the other last frontier.
The last frontier?
The last frontier.
Yes, I agree completely with you, and I would say, Jim, that in all fairness, metrics in this space that we have been discussing, for practical purposes, don't exist. We don't know how to do it. I don't know how to do it, certainly. Eva refers to one approach, and that is that I wrote a performance criteria for the former dean of the College of Medicine that he needed to raise the live birth weights, a measurement of the health of the community, by some percentage. And when he sort of protested along the same lines that Eva just explicated, I said, look, in order to get this, you're going to have to build coalitions, you're going to have to build connections with hospitals, with clinics, and that's all part of what you need to do to accomplish this. Suffice it to say, however, neither he nor I truly believe that we could move the live birth weights in Northwest Ohio very much. Is it reasonable to ask the Dean of the College of Education here or at any university to take responsibility for measuring the graduation rates in the Toledo Public Schools, for example? Is that a reasonable thing? And once again, recognizing that a road to that, a pathway to that metric is building coalitions, building relationships. I think ultimately it is, but I would say that at the present time, metrics in this space are virtually non-existent.
Well, I think that's, I was just going to say, I think that's a very powerful way of thinking about it. And you know, even though we have collective impact around these things, why not take responsibility for saying we're going to make this happen? And we can at the same time say we're going to make this happen in collaboration with our partners. But to commit to those collective impact metrics, I think, is an important, powerful first step. Eva, I'm sorry, I was cutting you off.
That's okay. I'm sorry that Dr. Jacobs used that example, because once you get me started on colleges of education, it's a long story. And for full disclosure, I have a master's degree in education from the University of Pennsylvania Graduate School of Education, so I have been through at least one. I think that this is so much at the crux of why metrics are the final frontier. We have, for example, done decades of research on what works in schools to help students achieve. Books and books and books and books have been published on this. I myself worked once in an alternative school funded by the federal government in the 70s. I mean, a lot of money has gone into this problem. What we don't ever do is scale it up, take the 10 best ideas, scale it up, and make it happen in the schools. So until there is a metric, like what Dr. Jacobs said, is the Dean of Education responsible for how many scholarly works are published in the college, or is he or she responsible for the actual performance of the local schools? Recognizing, again, we've got to reach out because it's collaborative, it's mutual, it's not just us. Until we do that, we aren't going to be getting anywhere. We have to make those things matter. I
think, you said reaching out. I think that it is about connecting and having a conversation, and my friend Valerie has weighed in again, I think, with something that's very much...
Dr. Jacobs writing notes? He's going to discipline me in a minute now.
Valerie's also mentioned that, we need to start conversations with our community partners about what's important to them. They'll help us. They'll help us find concrete, measurable impacts that are a product of our collaborations. Generally, we look at our traditional university metrics as the end-all, and these may not have meaning for our partners. And I think Valerie has helped me transition very well, I think, to the one kind of final question I'd like to ask you both before we run out of time, which is, the name of this series is Social Capital, and that's because we believe that relationships and the development of trust are important in university engagement in the knowledge and innovation economy. And so I guess I just wanted to ask you, we've really been talking about the development of social capital, that, things like metrics are not what matters. What matters is how we get to them, the conversations that we have, the partnerships that we develop. I guess I'd just like to hear your thoughts about the importance of social capital to the to community development partnerships that of the type that we're talking about. We have just a few more minutes, but I'd love to just hear your thoughts on social capital development.
I can't help myself. I want to run back to the metrics just for a second.
Okay.
Many, Valerie and others, many metrics for the health and wellness of a community exist. We've mentioned a couple: graduation rates in the public schools, live birth rates, suicide rates, cancer rates, diabetes rates. There are plenty of metrics. The question is, the problem is developing a sense of shared responsibility toward those metrics. And you're absolutely right, that requires involvement of your partners to choose the metrics. But a lot of these exist. Now, Jim, the question that you want to address just
sounded like you just answered it, actually, but it really is. So the question is how do we develop the social capital that we need to have in place so that we're all on the same page in terms of what matters and how we get there? How do we develop trust? How do we create the conversations? We're coming from a different world often than our partners.
Well, he's thinking. Let's see. I'm going to jump back to metrics too. I'm a strategic planner by training. Okay, MBA, strategic planning. Here's a heresy. I think that before we define our goals and our strategies, we might first look at the outcome metrics that are desirable for society, and that could be defined at the level of a town or a community or a city of Toledo or in terms of a region, but in a dialogue with the community partners, what is it we need to get to? What outcomes? Is it educational attainment? Is it the level of the preparedness of the technical entry-level workforce? Is it health issues? What are the things we need to get to? And from that, we should be able to frame our strategic goals and priorities with some eye to what is it we're trying to achieve after all. Okay, so I think that the metrics are part of that. And to use the term social capital, we are going to be more and more in the social capital business than the education business because of technology. I just read yesterday about Oculus VR, a company started by a young guy from University of Maryland. He believes that we're going to be using 3D visualization, virtual reality technology in education before too long. If that's true, somebody says to him, why did you just give $31 million of your, by the way, he sold his company to Facebook for $2 billion with a B. He just gave $31 million to the University of Maryland to build a new building for the computer sciences. So the interviewer said, why are you still into buildings, if this is all going to be IT, virtual, blah, blah, blah. And he said, because we still have social reasons. We still have social reasons why we need relationships and interactions. And so the very business of the university may become more tilted to socialization and social patterns, connections with community. That's all I know.
Yeah, I agree.
What do you think about social capital?
And there will always need to be, I believe, there will always need to be places where people gather, where they interact on a human, personal level. And let me give you two examples, once again, of course, from this university. We have created a minority business incubator. In order to get space and support in that business incubator, you need to be a person of color, a minority person, and you need to have begun a entrepreneurial business. This has been a roaring success, but it answers, Jim, your question that we need to provide spaces where people come together and rub shoulders. In another part of the campus, there is a Eberly Women's Center for women in transition, attempting to take community, women from the community who are in transition, lost a job, divorced, or whatever recently, and try to give them a chance to come together in a space and sort of reset their goals and reset their expectations. So I think that one of the ways that we provide a venue, one small answer to your question, Jim, about how do we build social capital in a community, is to provide a venue for these interactions to occur.
I hear that physical space is important to social capital development, and I think that's a great point, and those were great examples. I'd like to, before we sign off, I'd like to say that another thing that's really important is trust. And I don't think we've had a chance to talk much about that yet, but boy, is that a piece of conversation that needs to happen, is how do we develop trust with these partners as we move forward. We are out of time. In fact, I have somebody else that needs to use the...
We're just getting warmed up.
I know. We'll continue the conversation on the phone. We'll record it for everybody. I want to thank everybody for being here. Really appreciate your participation. I encourage you to learn more about the Commission on Innovation. If you don't know about it, just go to www.aplu.org/SciSept. You can also find us on LinkedIn. And I want to also encourage you to think about joining us for the next Social Capital webinar on Thursday, October 16th. We're going to talk about emerging technology transfer partnership models. My guest will be Jacob Johnson, the founder of InnovaSource, Valerie McDevitt, who's the executive director of AUTUM, or the Association of University Technology Managers, and Howard Grimes from Idaho State University. We hope that you'll join us for that conversation as well. And just thank you very much for being here. Lloyd, thank you so much for being here. Eva, I really appreciate your time. Jennifer we really appreciate your time as well, and I'm sorry we couldn't engage you in today's session because of technical difficulties. But thanks again, everybody, and we'll look forward to seeing you on the next Social Capital. Bye-bye now.
Bye.